Until 7 handsome Lakota men knelt at her ranch, one fell for her. She had lived alone for years. For nearly 12 years, Elena had lived alone on her ranch at the edge of the wide-open plains. The land stretched so far that it seemed to meet the sky. In summer, the grass turned golden and shimmered under the sun. In winter, frost covered the fields like a thin sheet of glass. The wind was her most constant visitor. It brushed against the wooden walls, slipped through small cracks, and hummed softly at night. Most people would have found the silence too heavy, but for Elena, it had become familiar. She woke before sunrise every morning. The world was always at its quietest at that hour. The sky would still be dark blue, and the stars would fade slowly as the first light appeared. She liked that time best. It felt honest. No noise. No questions. Just her and the land. Her boots touched the wooden floor, and she would wrap a warm shawl around her shoulders before stepping outside. The air was often cold enough to make her breath visible. The horses would lift their heads as soon as they heard her footsteps. They trusted her. Animals always did. She fed them carefully, speaking to them in a low, calm voice. They were good listeners, better than most people she had known. After feeding the animals, she checked the fences. A ranch always needed repairs. Wind could loosen posts, rain could weaken wood. Sometimes wild animals pushed against the boundaries during the night. Elena carried her tools with steady hands. She worked without rushing. She believed that land should never be handled with anger or impatience. If something was broken, she fixed it quietly. People in the nearest town, which was nearly an hour away by truck, often talked about her. They rarely saw her except when she came to buy supplies. She would enter the small grocery store, nod politely, collect what she needed, and leave. She never stayed long enough for gossip to reach her ears directly, but she knew it existed. Some said she was lonely. Others said she was proud. A few believed she was still grieving the life she once had. No one knew the full story, and she never corrected them. It was easier that way. Years ago, Elena had not planned to live this kind of life. She once had dreams filled with laughter and shared plans. She had once imagined a home filled with warmth and voices. But life does not always follow the paths we draw in our minds. A sudden loss had changed everything. The details were known only to her heart. After that day, something inside her became quiet. Not cold, not bitter. Just quiet. She did not run away from the world in anger. She simply stepped back from it. The ranch had belonged to her family for generations. When she decided to move there permanently, many people were surprised. It was hard work. It was far from the city. There were no bright lights, no busy streets, no crowds. But she wanted space. Space to breathe. Space to think. Space to heal without being watched. At first, the silence felt heavy. At night, when the wind grew strong, it almost sounded like distant voices. She would sit by the small fireplace and hold a cup of tea, listening carefully. Sometimes memories returned during those quiet hours. She allowed them to pass through her mind like clouds. She did not fight them. She did not chase them either. Over time, the land began to comfort her. She learned the patterns of the seasons deeply. She could tell when rain was coming just by the smell in the air. She knew which fields would grow wildflowers first in spring. She knew the exact sound her barn door made when the wind pushed it too hard. The ranch became more than a place. It became her companion. After tending to the animals and fences, she worked on small repairs around the house. She kept everything simple but clean. The wooden porch faced the open plains. From there she could watch storms roll in from miles away. Dark clouds would gather slowly, like a curtain being drawn across the sky. She often stood there, arms folded, watching nature move without hurry. Sometimes she wondered if she had chosen solitude or if solitude had chosen her. There were moments when she felt strong, truly strong. She did not depend on anyone. She handled her finances, her repairs, her land. If something broke, she fixed it. If something went wrong, she found a solution. That independence gave her confidence, but strength and loneliness can look similar from a distance. On rare evenings when the sunset painted the sky in orange and soft pink, she felt something deeper than peace. It was a quiet ache, not sharp, not overwhelming, just a reminder that human hearts are meant to connect. She would quickly distract herself by organizing tools or preparing the next day's tasks. The ranch had one area she rarely visited, the far back corner of the property. Long ago, there had been a small natural spring there. Her grandfather had told her stories about it when she was a child. He said the water was once clear and cold, and travelers used to stop there to rest. Over the years, the spring had dried up. Now, it was just a patch of cracked earth surrounded by tall grass. Elena did not know why, but she avoided spending much time there. Perhaps it reminded her that even something full of life could one day become empty. One afternoon, as the sun stood high and bright, Elena was repairing a section of fence near the front of her property. The day was warm but windy. Dust moved lightly across the road in the distance. She wiped her forehead with the back of her hand and reached for a nail from her small tin box. That was when she saw movement far beyond the gate. At first she thought it was just travelers passing by. It was rare, but not impossible. The road near her ranch was long and quiet. Few vehicles used it. But as she narrowed her eyes against the sunlight, she realized these were not cars. They were riders. 7 figures approached slowly on horseback. Visitors were unusual. 7 visitors were even more unusual. She felt her heartbeat shift slightly, not in fear, but in alertness. She set down her tools carefully and walked toward the porch, where she could observe more clearly. The riders moved in a calm and steady line. There was no rush in their pace, no signs of disturbance. As they drew closer, she noticed their expressions were serious yet peaceful. They did not shout or wave. They simply approached with quiet purpose. When they reached her closed gate, something unexpected happened. All 7 riders stopped at the same time. They dismounted slowly, almost in unison. Dust rose gently around their boots as they stepped onto the ground. The wind continued to move through the fields, carrying with it a strange stillness. Elena stood tall on her porch. She did not retreat inside. This was her land. She had nothing to hide from. Then, one by one, the 7 men lowered themselves onto one knee. They knelt before her gate. Elena's breath caught in her throat. She had lived on this ranch for years. Salesmen had come and gone. Delivery trucks had broken down near her fence. Stray animals had wandered close. But she had never seen anything like this. 7 grown men, kneeling in silence at her gate. They did not bow their heads in weakness. They knelt with dignity, with intention. The wind seemed to soften. Even the horses stood quietly, as if understanding the weight of the moment. Questions filled her mind. Who were they? Why were they here? What did this gesture mean? Curiosity. For years, her life had followed the same pattern. Predictable, controlled, safe. But as she stood there, watching those 7 men kneeling at the entrance to her world, she felt the first true crack in her carefully built walls. The plains around her remained wide and open. The sky above stretched endlessly, and for the first time in a long while, the silence did not feel empty. It felt like the beginning of something she could not yet understand. Elena stood still on her porch, her fingers lightly gripping the wooden railing. The sight in front of her did not feel ordinary. 7 men remained on one knee outside her gate, their heads slightly lowered, their horses calm behind them. The wind moved across the open plains, lifting small waves of dust, but none of the men shifted or rushed. For a long moment no one spoke. Elena finally stepped down from the porch. Her boots pressed firmly into the dry soil as she walked toward the gate. Each step felt careful, steady. She did not want to show fear, even though her heart was beating faster than usual. She had learned long ago that calmness was her greatest shield. When she reached the gate, the man closest to her slowly rose to his feet. The others followed, standing in quiet unity. There was something respectful in the way they moved, something practiced yet natural. The man who had risen first appeared to be slightly older than the others. His hair was tied neatly at the back, and his expression was serious but kind. He placed his right hand gently over his chest. "My name is Thomas," he said in a calm voice. "We come in peace and respect." "Only sincerity." Elena nodded slightly, but did not open the gate yet. "Why are you here?" she asked, her voice steady and direct. Thomas glanced briefly at the others before speaking again. "Our family has history with this land. Long before fences were built, long before roads were named, our ancestors walked here. There was once a spring near the back of this property." At the mention of the spring, Elena felt a small stir inside her. She had not expected anyone else to know about it. Thomas continued, "It was a sacred place for our elders, a place of prayer and reflection. We've come to ask for permission, nothing more." "Permission?" Elena repeated quietly. "Yes," he said. "Permission to walk to the old spring, to stand there, to pray quietly. We will not disturb your land. We will not take anything. We only wish to honor what once flowed there." The wind passed between them again, but this time it did not feel cold. Elena studied their faces carefully. They did not look like men trying to claim ownership. They did not carry tools or papers or signs of argument. Their request was simple. Still, her guard remained up. "This land belongs to my family," she said. "It has for generations." Thomas nodded respectfully. "We understand. and we respect that. We are not here to change that. We only ask for your kindness. Elena felt something unusual in her chest. For years, she had dealt with people who either ignored her boundaries or tried to convince her to sell parts of her property. She had received letters from companies offering money. She had heard suggestions from town officials about development. She had refused them all. But this was different. These men were not offering money. They were not threatening legal action. They were asking with humility. She glanced past them toward the wide fields. The old spring was far back, near a cluster of tall grass and scattered stones. No one had visited that area in years. Not even her. "Why now?" she asked. Thomas took a slow breath. "One of our elders has been speaking of the spring for many months. He is aging, and he wishes to see it again, even if only the earth remains. He says the land remembers." The words felt heavy but gentle at the same time. Elena had lived alone for so long that she rarely considered how others might see her land. To her, it was work, responsibility. But to them it carried memory and spirit. She hesitated. Allowing strangers onto her ranch felt risky. Even if they seemed respectful, trust was not something she offered easily. Trust had once been broken in her life, and rebuilding it had taken years. She crossed her arms lightly, thinking, "If I agree," she said slowly, "there will be rules." Thomas nodded immediately. "Of course." "You come only during daylight?" "Yes. You inform me before arriving." "We will. Only those who truly need to be there." He paused for a second before answering. "Agreed. And you respect the rest of my land, no wandering beyond the spring?" "You have my word," he said. His answer came without hesitation. Elena searched his face for any sign of deception, but she found none. The other men remained silent, standing tall but patient. Finally, after a long, quiet moment, she reached for the gate latch. The metal made a soft clicking sound as it opened. "You may visit," she said, "but only as agreed." Thomas gave a small nod of gratitude. The others followed, each placing a hand briefly over their chest in thanks. "Thank you," Thomas said sincerely. "Your kindness will not be forgotten." As they prepared to return to their horses, one of the younger men stepped slightly forward. He had been quiet the entire time, observing more than speaking. His presence felt steady, grounded. Their eyes met briefly. There was something different about his gaze. It was not intense or bold. It was thoughtful, curious perhaps, as if he saw more than just a ranch owner standing at a gate. Elena looked away first. The men mounted their horses and turned back down the road, leaving behind nothing but faint hoof prints in the dust. The wind soon began to smooth those marks away. Elena closed the gate again and stood there for a while, staring at the empty road. Her world had been predictable for years. She controlled who entered her space. She controlled how much of herself she showed to others. Yet, today, she had opened her gate to strangers. As she walked back toward the house, her thoughts felt unsettled. Had she made the right choice? That evening, as she sat near the fireplace, she found herself thinking about the spring. About ancestors walking freely across land that now had fences. About memory living quietly beneath soil. She tried to focus on her usual tasks, checking her supply list, preparing tools for the next morning, but her mind kept returning to the image of 7 men, kneeling in respect. It had not felt like weakness. It had felt like honor. The next morning arrived bright and clear. Elena woke as usual before sunrise, fed the horses, and checked the fences. But there was a new awareness in her movements. A sense that something beyond her daily routine had shifted. 3 days later, just as promised, a truck stopped near her gate in the early afternoon. This time, there were only 4 men, including Thomas and the quiet younger man she had noticed before. She walked out to meet them. "We informed you as agreed," Thomas said, offering a gentle nod. "We will go only to the spring and return before sunset. I will walk with you," she said unexpectedly. Thomas looked slightly surprised, but smiled. "You are welcome." The grass brushed against their boots, and the sky above seemed larger than ever. No one spoke much. The quiet felt comfortable rather than tense. When they reached the old spring, Elena paused. The earth there was cracked and dry, just as she remembered. Tall grass surrounded the shallow dip in the ground. Small stones formed a natural circle. The men stood still for a moment, as if greeting an old friend. Then, gently, they stepped forward and formed a loose circle around the dry spring. They closed their eyes. No loud words were spoken, no dramatic gestures were made, just quiet presence. Elena watched from a short distance. For years, she had seen this patch of land as lifeless, forgotten. But as the men stood there with respect, it no longer looked empty. It looked meaningful. The quiet younger man opened his eyes briefly and noticed her watching. He gave a small nod, not inviting her closer, not pushing her away, simply acknowledging her presence. The wind moved softly through the tall grass, and for reasons she could not fully explain, Elena felt something within her begin to soften. The land she had protected for so long was no longer just hers alone in memory. It was part of something older, deeper, and without realizing it, the walls around her heart shifted just slightly. Not broken, but no longer as unmovable as before. After that first visit to the old spring, something changed in the rhythm of Elena's days. Her routine stayed the same on the outside. She still woke before sunrise. She still fed the horses, checked the fences, and repaired whatever needed fixing. But inside, her thoughts were no longer as quiet as before. The men returned once a week, always sending a message ahead of time through Thomas. They never arrived without notice. They never brought more people than agreed. Each time they walked directly to the spring and remained there in calm reflection. Elena did not join them every time, but she found herself watching from a distance. At first, she told herself she was simply making sure they followed the rules. After all, it was her responsibility to protect the land. But deep down she knew that was not the only reason. There was something about the way they stood around the dry earth that made her see it differently. They did not treat it as something broken. They treated it as something resting. One afternoon, after a light rain had passed through the plains, the group finished their quiet gathering and began heading back toward the gate. Elena was standing near the barn, adjusting a loose rope, when she noticed that one of the horses had a small issue with its saddle strap. Before she could say anything, the quiet younger man stepped aside from the group and crouched near the horse. His movements were careful and patient. He spoke softly to the animal while tightening the strap. Elena walked closer. "You know how to handle horses well," she said, her tone neutral but curious. He looked up briefly, offering a small smile. "My grandfather raised them. I learned when I was a boy." His voice was calm, steady, and warm. It carried no arrogance. "What's your name?" she asked. "Daniel," he replied, standing up slowly. "And thank you again for allowing us here." She nodded once. "You've kept your word." There was a short silence between them, but it did not feel awkward. The wind moved gently through the open space. In the distance, Thomas and the others were already near the gate, giving them space without making it obvious. Daniel glanced toward the barn. "Your fence on the east side looks like it might need reinforcement. The last storm probably weakened it." Elena raised an eyebrow slightly. "You've been observing my fences?" He shook his head quickly. "Not in a bad way, just noticing. When you work with land long enough, you start seeing what it needs." There was no hidden meaning in his words, just simple truth. "You're right," she admitted. "It does need fixing. If you'd like help next time, I'd be glad to assist," he offered. She almost refused out of habit. For years, she had done everything alone. Accepting help felt unfamiliar, but she paused before answering. "I'll think about it," she said. Daniel nodded, not pushing further. "Of course." That evening, as Elena sat by the fireplace, she replayed the conversation in her mind. It had been simple, no deep discussions, no dramatic words. Yet it lingered. The next week, when the group arrived again, Elena was already working on the east fence. The wooden post had loosened more than she expected. She was trying to lift it into position when she heard footsteps behind her. "May I?" Daniel asked gently. She stepped aside without speaking. Together, they worked in quiet coordination. He held the post steady while she secured it. When the hammer slipped slightly from her grip, he caught it before it fell. "Thank you," she murmured. "No problem." They continued repairing the fence side by side. The work did not feel heavy. It felt shared. After finishing, they leaned back slightly, examining the result. "That should hold through the next storm," Daniel said. Elena wiped her hands on a cloth. "You didn't have to help." "I know," he replied. "I wanted to." His answer was simple, without expectation. Over the next few visits, small conversations began to grow between them. They spoke about the weather patterns of the plains. They spoke about animals, about soil, about how different seasons carried different moods. One afternoon, as they walked back from the spring, Daniel told her about his grandfather's stories. He described how elders believed that land holds memory, even when people forget. "Elena," he said quietly, "when water dries up, it doesn't always mean it's gone forever. Sometimes it's waiting for the right time." "And what brings the right time?" "Patience," he answered, "and care." His words felt like they carried more than one meaning. That night, she found herself standing on the porch longer than usual. The sky was painted with soft orange and pink. For years, sunsets had felt beautiful but distant. Now they felt shared, even when she stood alone. Weeks passed. Daniel began staying a little longer after the others left. Not in secret. Thomas always knew. The trust between them was clear. One evening, as they sat on overturned wooden crates near the barn, Elena surprised herself by speaking about her past. "I wasn't always alone here," she said softly. Daniel did not interrupt. He simply listened. "I once planned a different life," she continued. "But plans can change very quickly." She did not go into details. She did not need to. The weight in her voice said enough. "I'm sorry," Daniel said gently. She shook her head. "It's been many years. I learned to live with it." "Living with something and healing from it are not always the same," he replied. She looked at him sharply, but there was no judgment in his face. "You speak like someone who understands loss," she said. "I do," he answered quietly. "We all carry something." There was honesty in his words, and that honesty created a bridge between them. After that evening, Elena found herself waiting for the sound of approaching horses on visiting days. She would tell herself it was just to prepare, just to follow the rules, but her heart knew better. The ranch no longer felt as empty. The wind still moved across the plains, but it did not sound lonely anymore. It sounded alive. One late afternoon, as golden light covered the fields, Daniel stayed behind once again. The others had already left. He stood near the old spring, looking down at the cracked earth. "Elena," he said softly as she approached. "May I tell you something?" She nodded. "I did not expect to find connection here," he began. "I came for the land, for my family. But sometimes life offers more than we seek." Her breath caught slightly. He did not step closer. He did not reach for her hand. He simply stood where he was, giving her space. "I respect your strength," he continued, "and I respect your independence. I would never ask you to change who you are, but I would be honest if I said I feel something growing between us." The air felt still. Elena's heart began to beat faster. For years, she had built careful walls around her emotions. Those walls had protected her. They had kept her safe from disappointment. Now someone was standing gently at the gate of her heart, not trying to break it down, but simply asking to enter. "I don't know if I can offer what you're hoping for," she said honestly. "I'm not asking for promises," Daniel replied. "Only openness. We take life one step at a time." She looked toward the wide plains, then back at him. The sun dipped lower, casting long shadows across the land. The dry spring between them no longer looked lifeless. It looked patient. Elena felt fear rise inside her. Not fear of him, but fear of beginning again. Fear of allowing herself to care deeply. Fear of possibly losing something once more. But beneath that fear, there was warmth. For the first time in years, she did not feel alone by choice. She felt seen. And as the evening light wrapped softly around them, she realized that sometimes the strongest thing a person can do is not to stand alone, but to consider standing beside someone else. The wind moved gently across the plains again. This time it did not carry silence. It carried possibility. After Daniel spoke honestly about his feelings, nothing changed quickly on the outside. The ranch still stood wide and quiet. The fences still needed checking. The horses still waited for their morning feed. But inside Elena's heart, everything felt different. She had not given him an answer that evening. She had only nodded and said she needed time. Daniel had accepted that without hesitation. He did not look disappointed. He did not try to convince her. He simply respected her words. That respect made it harder for her to ignore what she was feeling. Over the next few days, she noticed small things. She noticed how often she thought about his voice. She noticed how her eyes searched the horizon on the day the men usually visited. She noticed that the ranch, once a place of protection, now felt like a place where something new might grow. But along with that hope came fear. At night, when the wind brushed against the wooden walls, old memories returned. She remembered how deeply she had once trusted. She remembered how sudden change had left her alone in ways she never expected. She had survived that pain by building distance between herself and the world. Opening her heart again felt like stepping into unknown weather, without knowing if a storm was coming. When the group arrived the following week, Elena greeted them calmly. She had practiced that calmness in front of her mirror, reminding herself that she was strong, that she was not someone who rushed into decisions. Thomas noticed something thoughtful in her expression, but said nothing. The men walked toward the spring as usual. Daniel lingered for a moment near her. "I hope you've had a peaceful week," he said gently. "It's been steady," she replied. It was her favorite word. Steady meant safe. After the gathering at the spring, the men prepared to leave. But before mounting his horse, Daniel turned back toward her. I'll be repairing part of the old fence near the stream tomorrow, he said. If you need help with anything, I'll be nearby. He was giving her space while still staying close. The next day, she told herself she did not need help. She had repaired fences alone for years, but as she struggled with a heavy wooden post that refused to stay straight, frustration crept in. Without thinking too much, she walked toward the edge of her property where Daniel was working. He looked up as she approached, wiping his hands on a cloth. "Fence trouble?" he asked with a small smile. "Maybe," she admitted. Together, they lifted the post and secured it firmly into the ground. The work required strength and coordination. At one point, their hands brushed briefly as they reached for the same tool. Elena felt a quick warmth travel through her, unexpected and gentle. After finishing, they stood back to examine the repair. "You always handle things yourself?" Daniel said quietly. "That takes courage." "It takes necessity," she replied. He shook his head slightly. "It also takes heart." She looked at him, unsure how to respond. Compliments made her uncomfortable. She was used to being seen as capable, not admired. As days passed, their conversations grew deeper. They spoke not only about land and weather, but about dreams and fears. Daniel shared stories about his childhood, about learning traditions from his elders, about understanding that strength could come from community as much as independence. Elena listened carefully. "You've lived alone for a long time," he said one afternoon as they sat near the barn watching the horses graze. "Do you ever feel tired of carrying everything by yourself?" She paused before answering. "Sometimes. But I don't know any other way." "There are other ways," he said softly. "They don't take away your strength. They simply share the weight." His words stayed with her long after he left that evening. A few days later, Thomas came to visit alone. He asked politely if he could speak with her. They sat on the porch, the wide plain stretching before them. "You've been kind to us," Thomas said. "Our elder wishes to thank you personally. He is not strong enough to travel often, but he hopes to come next week." Elena felt a mix of nervousness and curiosity. "He is welcome," she replied. When the elder arrived the following week, he walked slowly with the support of a cane. His face carried deep lines of age and wisdom. His eyes, however, were bright. Elena guided them toward the old spring. The elder stood silently for a long moment, breathing in the air as if recognizing something familiar. "This land remembers," he said softly. "And so do we." He turned toward Elena. "You have protected this place. That is honorable." No one had ever thanked her for protecting the ranch. People had often questioned her choices, but rarely had anyone honored them. The elder placed his hand gently over his heart in gratitude. As they stood together near the spring, a light breeze moved through the tall grass. The cracked earth looked less harsh in that moment. It looked patient, as if waiting quietly. That evening, Elena felt something inside her shift again. The land she had guarded so fiercely was no longer just a symbol of isolation. It was a bridge between histories, between people. Daniel approached her later, his expression thoughtful. "You don't have to decide anything today," he said quietly, "or tomorrow. I only want you to know that my feelings are steady. They are not rushed." She appreciated that word again. Steady. "I'm afraid," she admitted finally. "No," she said quickly. "Of losing again?" "Of opening something I might not be able to close." Daniel nodded. "Fear means you care. But fear doesn't have to control the future." She looked down at the dry spring. "What if it never flows again?" she asked. He stepped closer, not touching her, but near enough that she could feel his presence. "Sometimes water returns when no one expects it, and even if it doesn't, the earth still holds life beneath the surface." Her eyes met his. In that moment, she realized something important. Loving someone did not mean forgetting the past. It did not mean ignoring pain. It meant accepting that life carries both loss and hope together. Weeks passed gently. One morning after a night of heavy rain, Elena walked toward the spring out of curiosity. The sky was still gray and the ground was damp beneath her boots. As she reached the familiar patch of earth, she stopped. At the lowest point of the dry spring, a small pool of water had gathered. It was not large, it was not dramatic, but it was there. Clear and quiet. She knelt down slowly, touching the surface with her fingertips. The water was cool. Her heart filled with something she had not allowed herself to feel in years, hope without fear. Later that day, when Daniel arrived with the others, she led them to the spring without saying a word. When they saw the small pool of water, their expressions softened with quiet joy. The elder smiled gently. "The land responds to patience," he said. Elena looked at Daniel. For years she had believed that strength meant standing alone, that protecting her heart meant closing it completely. But as she stood there beside him, watching water rest where dryness once ruled, she understood something deeper. Strength could also mean trust. And maybe, just maybe, beginning again did not mean risking everything. Maybe it meant allowing life to flow back in, slowly and steadily. The wind moved softly across the plains, carrying the scent of fresh rain. And for the first time in a very long while, Elena did not feel afraid of what tomorrow might bring. The small pool of water at the old spring did not disappear after that first rain. In the days that followed, more clouds passed over the plains, and light showers came and went. Each time Elena walked to the back of her ranch, she checked the shallow dip in the earth. The water was still there. Sometimes it was only a thin layer reflecting the sky. Other times it was deep enough to ripple when the wind touched it. It was not a rushing stream. It was not loud or dramatic. It was quiet and steady, just like the change happening inside her. The men continued visiting, but now their gatherings near the spring felt different. There was a sense of renewal in the air. The elder came once more, supported gently by Thomas and Daniel. When he saw the water again, he closed his eyes for a long moment, breathing slowly as if offering silent thanks. Elena stood beside them, no longer at a distance. She did not feel like an outsider anymore. She felt like part of something larger than her own story. Daniel noticed that change. He did not speak about it right away. He simply stayed close in quiet understanding. When she walked, he matched her pace. When she paused to look at the horizon, he did not rush her. One evening, after the others had left, Elena and Daniel remained near the spring. The sun was setting, painting the sky in soft gold and pale pink. The water reflected the colors like a small mirror resting in the earth. "It's strange," Elena said softly. "I avoided this place for years. I thought it was a reminder of something lost. And now?" Daniel asked gently. "Now it feels like a reminder that not everything lost stays gone." He smiled slightly. "The land has its own timing. And what about people?" "People too," he replied, "if they allow it." The word allow stayed in her mind. For so long, she had believed that life simply happened to her. Loss had happened. Loneliness had happened. A strength had happened because she had no choice. But now she understood that opening her heart would be a choice. Not something forced, not something accidental. A few weeks later, Thomas informed her that the men wished to gather at the spring for a special moment of gratitude. It would be simple and respectful, just as always. Elena agreed. On the day of the gathering, the sky was clear and bright. A soft breeze moved across the plains, bending the tall grass in gentle waves. Elena stood on her porch watching as the 7 Lakota men approached once more on horseback. This time her heart did not race with uncertainty. It beat with anticipation. When they reached her gate, she was already walking toward them. She opened it before they had to stop. "You are welcome," she said. They nodded in thanks and rode toward the spring together, Elena walking beside Daniel. The land looked alive under the sunlight. Wild flowers had begun to bloom in small patches nearby. The pool of water shimmered quietly. When they reached the spring, the 7 men dismounted. Elena felt a familiar stillness settle in the air. One by one, the men stepped forward and lowered themselves onto one knee near the water, just as they had done on the very first day at her gate, but this time she understood. They were not kneeling to her. They were kneeling in respect to the land, to the memory of their ancestors, to the quiet blessing of renewal. Daniel remained standing for a moment longer. He looked at the water, then at Elena. The others stayed respectfully silent. Then Daniel slowly lowered himself onto one knee, not in front of the spring, but in front of her. Her breath caught. The wind moved gently through her hair as she stared at him, surprised but not afraid. "Elena," he said, his voice steady and clear, "I came here to honor the past. I did not expect to find a future. But standing on this land with you, I have learned something important." She felt her heart beating strongly now, but it was not from fear. It was from emotion she had kept hidden for too long. "I do not kneel to ask you to give up your strength," he continued. "I kneel to honor it. I do not ask you to leave your independence. I ask to walk beside it." His words were simple, but they carried deep meaning. "I care for you," he said, "not because you need someone, but because I respect who you are. If you choose to let me share your life, I promise to stand with you. Not in front of you, not behind you." Elena looked at the 7 men still kneeling near the spring. She looked at the water reflecting the sky. She looked at the wide plains that had held her solitude for so many years. She remembered the nights she had sat alone by the fire, convincing herself that loneliness was the safest path. She remembered the strength she had built with her own hands. She remembered the fear of losing again, but she also remembered the warmth of shared work, the comfort of steady conversation, the quiet understanding in Daniel's eyes. The ranch would always be hers. Her past would always be part of her. Opening her heart would not erase any of that. Slowly, she stepped closer to him. "You didn't rush me," she said softly. "You didn't try to change me." He looked up at her. "You never needed changing." She felt tears gather in her eyes, but they were not tears of sadness. They were tears of release. "For years," she continued, "I thought being strong meant being alone. I thought protecting my heart meant closing it completely. But I see now that even dry ground can hold life beneath it." Daniel waited patiently, still on one knee. Elena reached out her hand. "You may stand beside me," she said gently. A soft smile spread across his face as he rose to his feet. He did not pull her into a dramatic embrace. He simply held her hand firmly, respectfully. The other men stood as well, their expressions warm and approving but calm. There was no loud celebration, no shouting, only quiet joy. The elder, who had come one final time despite his age, stepped forward slowly. "This is how life moves," he said. "Through patience, through respect, through shared strength." The wind moved across the plains again, stronger this time but not harsh. It carried the scent of grass and water. Elena looked around at her ranch. For years it had been a place of healing through solitude. Now it would become a place of healing through connection. The fences still stood strong. The barn still needed repairs from time to time. The horses still waited each morning for feed. But she would no longer carry everything alone. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in warm colors, Elena and Daniel stood side by side near the spring. The water reflected both of them together. She realized that love had not arrived to replace her past. It had arrived to honor it. And as the light faded gently over the open plains, the ranch that once held only silence now held something more powerful. A new beginning, built not on fear but on trust. For the first time in many years, Elena did not feel like a woman who had lived alone. She felt like a woman who had chosen to open her heart again.